Good afternoon. My name is Danny Plugger, and I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Transit Association. I want to welcome everybody to the first VTA DRPT Lunch and Learn webinar of 2026. VTA is so thankful for this partnership and the opportunity to offer our members in the Commonwealth transit community a deeper dive into public transportation's challenges, issues, and processes with insight from the experts. This webinar series would not be possible without the support, partnership, and expertise of DRPT. As a reminder, our former programs are on VT's YouTube page if you'd like to go back and watch them. As always, if you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A chat box, and I'll ask them at the appropriate time. A few pieces of housekeeping. First and foremost, registration and sponsorships are now open for VTA's 49th Annual Conference and Bus Expo in May in Fredericksburg. Our annual conferences have sold out for the last 3 years, so please make sure to grab your spot today. We're going to have a very exciting program for you all. Also, applications for conference session proposals and award nominations are due on March 6th. So please get those applications submitted as soon as possible. And you can find information on both of those on our website at vatransit.com. Next, applications are also open for the next Virginia Transit Leadership Institute class. So if you or someone in your organization would be a good candidate for the program, please go to our website for details in the application. They're due at the end of April. Last, but certainly not least, March is Transit Operator Appreciation Month. DRPT, VTA, and I believe CTAV are all partnering together to honor the men and women who literally keep our communities moving. So if you want to honor one of your transit operators and have them celebrated across all the platforms by all the organizations, DRPT has a survey application for you to fill out. So please reach out to Oliver on my team or Andy at DRPT to get the survey link and make sure that we honor the men and women who keep us moving. So that was a lot of things going on, a very busy time in transit. But today we have a very special program for you all, a conversation with DRPT's new director, Mariia Zimmerman. Director Zimmerman was appointed by Governor Spanberger to serve as the 9th director of the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. Before being appointed to lead DRPT, she ran her own consulting firm, MZ Strategies, and she has previously served as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Transportation in the Biden administration, overseeing the implementation of the IIJA, or Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, as well as Deputy Director for Sustainable Housing and Communities at HUD during the Obama administration. She was also a co-founder of Transportation for America, and all combined, those are just the highlights. She has had a very extensive career in transit and housing. So please grab your lunch, sit back, and enjoy our conversation. Director Zimmerman, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Danny. It's great to be with you here. I'm joining you from the PRTC building where I'm looking at the OmniRide fleet. I was worried my computer was about to die, so apologies for the gymnastics as I tried to find a plug-in for my laptop, but we're all good now. So thank you for inviting me to be here, and thank you and thanks to the incredible staff at DRPT who I have the pleasure and the honor of working with every day now. They're just a terrific team and part of why it was easy for me to say yes when I was offered this opportunity to come and work for the state and for the governor.
Fantastic. And you do have a great team, and we always appreciate the fantastic partnership between VTA and DRPT. So Director Zimmerman, can you talk a little bit about your background and what kind of got you interested in public transportation? I know, that has been something you've been involved in both from the transportation aspect, but also the housing aspect as well.
A great question. I could bore everyone with my career, though I found my career very rewarding and exciting. I've gotten to work at the federal level. I've gotten to work in the private sector and the nonprofit sector. have worked with communities all across the country on a range of issues of trying to fund and finance transit, to trying to coordinate transit with housing and housing development, trying to look at strategies to finance and support affordable housing. I've worked a lot on rail issues over the years, a whole host of things. But my family is often asking me, like, why do you like transportation so much? Those of you who don't know me, I grew up on a farm in rural Minnesota. I'm the youngest of 9. I have 7 brothers. So not really maybe the pedigree you'd think of like a hardcore transit advocate. But I will say growing up, the youngest of 9, my mother was very much like, you all have to fend for yourselves. And so at a young age, even when I wanted to go see my grandmother who lived several towns away, I would bike to the town nearby where I could catch Greyhound, and I could take Greyhound to go see Grandma. That route no longer runs, and so it's been interesting seeing in so much of rural America where we've lost some of that interconnectivity that used to be there, that transit provided. I saw with my own father when he lost the ability to drive, how devastating it was not to have options. We didn't really have paratransit options that were available for him, so it was really relying on family and friends, and it took a huge toll on his mental health and his physical health. And so for me, even though I've lived most of my adult life in a city, the rural component really informs a lot of my experience. I would say I fell in love with cities when I went to college and was a very frequent transit rider, taking Metro Transit in Minnesota. And, I loved the way you connected me, of course, across the city. But I also love like the people watching and the people connections that you have when you're riding the bus. And it's interesting at a time where I think we kind of are becoming more disconnected from each other in some ways, like riding the bus, taking transit, like you're connected to people for good or bad, but you're connected to people. And you have to be pretty smart to be a transit rider. You have to plan ahead. You have to know the routes. You have to know the timing. You have to know if you need an umbrella. All those things that, really matter. And so that had a big impact on me. And I think also around that time, I had a family member whose husband became paralyzed. And she asked if I could help them figure out how to get paratransit service. And that was just, I will say, an incredibly dehumanizing experience, unfortunately. And so to me, again, it was like how important this service is and how do we make it better for the people who rely on it. And then last but not least, we moved to DC in the mid-90s, and I was really excited to live in a place that had great transit, not to throw shade on Minnesota, because they actually have a great transit system. But back when I was there, it wasn't quite as great as today. But my husband and I wanted to live near transit. And so we lived in Arlington, just a few blocks from the Clarendon Metro. And it was just an incredible lifestyle to not have to drive everywhere. We had our kids there, the mobility and freedom that they had. When we came to Richmond about 10 years ago, for both of my kids, that was the biggest thing that they said they missed. They missed transit. So I felt good as a mom, right? Like, I've raised little transit lovers. But it was much more just practical for them of they felt this freedom and independence. And then when we moved to Henrico County, and there just wasn't that connection. So yeah, I'd say it's like kind of in my blood, I guess. It's in my DNA. I fell in love with transit early on and have had the good fortitude to be able to work on these issues from a lot of different perspectives over my career and with some great people.
Absolutely. And growing up in Northern Virginia, my mom would drop my friends off at the metro station, like on our way to work on 66 with $20 in your pocket. And we would spend all days on the Capitol Mall, hitting the museums during summer. And that's, when we were, teenagers, 12, 13, 14, that's kind of how we kept ourselves busy. And it did create that freedom, I think, that sometimes is missing in that suburban type lifestyle that a lot of folks don't get experience to. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where my personal love is. Just you get to see around and venture, and then also, taking transit, you run into people you haven't seen in a while, and you catch up and you have conversations. And it's one of those, I've been meaning to talk text you or call you, and then but I see you on the bus, and how's the family? And it's a very connecting in our communities, and it plays a huge role more than just, I think, mobility. I think you're spot on. So 2 months on the job. Welcome. And in a
Only
right
one
as
month.
we enter
Only
the
1 month.
1 month, a month and a half ish, right? Like we'll go monthly, right? So now that you've gotten your feet wet and you've absorbed all the information, what are your top 3 priorities for DRPT kind of over the Spanberg administration? And how do you see those our transit agencies seeing those priorities reflected in funding and policy and assistance to the 40 transit agencies that move millions of people every single day?
Yeah. No, great question. And yes, I did start January 20th was my first day. So here we are on February 20th. Yeah, no, it's really been a whirlwind month, but again, lots happening, having worked on these issues, kind of coming into it with some awareness, but it's been so great to meet with a number of people from across the state this last month. It was great to have VTA's event there in Richmond, so was really nice to connect with people there. I am hoping and planning here over the next year to continue meeting, coming out I'd love to visit your transit agencies, love to see your communities. I know, any way that my staff and I can be supportive and connected with you, our door is always open. But again, I'm on the road going to visit different parts of the state anyhow, so always happy to swing in and swing by. So with that kind of in mind, the 3 things most on my list and that we're really focusing in on at DRPT this year, and I assume over the next 4 years, are really going to be around affordability, around reliability, and around connectivity. And so in thinking about affordability, that's both from the perspective of individuals who are choosing to take transit. We have great transit systems across the state. We've seen transit ridership grew 14% last year, which is phenomenal. Let's keep that up. Let's keep those projections going. Andy and I were talking, we're sort of done talking about pre-COVID, like that was a long time ago now, folks. Like, what's our future? How are we going to grow it? What does that mean? And I think part of that is really making people who maybe aren't taking transit more aware of what's available in their community, what are the benefits, how it really can help to save the family money. Transportation is the second highest household cost after housing for most households in Virginia. And even we hear a lot about the rising costs of energy and healthcare. We know transportation is connected to those 2 costs as well. So I think, what can we do to make people both aware of transit as an affordable option? And then what can we do for transit operators? I'm sure we're going to talk about this, Danny, but we're continuing to see in Virginia and all across the country rising operating costs, rising capital costs. And so just affordability as well. What does that mean for transit agencies who are trying to do your best, and something that you could get out on the street and have running, 2 years ago is now costing you 20, 30, perhaps more percent to be doing. And so that's really a serious challenge for us and something we're very focused on at DRPT. So happy to talk about that a little bit more. And then, thinking about reliability, again, thinking about that both from the rider and from the agency. For riders, having more reliable transit, we know, is key to increasing ridership. And so what are ways that we can be making those investments, including in the space of innovation and technology use and micromobility and other things that are going to give the riders really a sense of, if the bus isn't coming more frequently, at least I know here's some other options. What's that kind of piece I can tap into? For transit agencies, again, one of the things that we've been having a lot of discussion the last month is, I'm sure folks are aware of at DRPT, we allocate the state transit capital and operating formula funding through our merit program and through other grant programs that we have. And so I'm very happy this last week, the Commonwealth Transportation Board passed a resolution that gives us a little bit more time to have outreach. We've heard from many of you that you had questions questions, you had concerns, you wanted to better understand the process that was happening to look at how we're allocating those funds. So we have a couple more months to do that. And one of the things that I've been talking with the team about is how can we make improvements to that formula that will be easier for you all to see. What do we mean by good performance? How are we truly rewarding agencies that are making cutting cost efficiencies, that are improving service? But also, are there ways that we can make it a little bit more reliable? I was really stunned. It was literally my first day on the job was the TISDAC meeting, and seeing, some agencies are seeing a 10, 14, 19% change year from year in that state formula funding that they're getting. Are there ways that we can maybe cushion that a little bit? Because it's hard to do multi-year programming when you don't really know kind of what's going to be happening with that. So that's some of the stuff we're thinking about, we're working through to think about how we can improve reliability a little bit more for transit agencies themselves. And then connectivity, I mentioned. Both how transit is clearly connected to investments we're making in our road network. It's connected to bike and pedestrian issues, how we can be connecting that more fully to support it. Every transit rider is a pedestrian. And so making sure we have safe access for folks, that we have, complete streets that are connecting to our transit facilities, that we have transit supportive housing really happening around our transit stations. So we're interested in kind of what we can do on all of those, some in partnership with VDOT and others, but also thinking more about that housing and transit connection and ways that we might be able to support more transit supportive land use planning. So.
Excellent. And, one of the innovative programs, which I've been proud to have a, small finger in helping expand and create, is the Safety and Bus Stop Improvement Program in TRIP. I don't think we realize sometimes, or drivers don't realize how critical a crosswalk is, or a lighting near a bus stop, or how those facilities really increase ridership and then also increase quality. And that's a great program that y'all are doing, and which is very exciting, and kind of getting outside the box of just the operating bucket and the capital bucket for new buses, and thinking innovatively. And so that's very exciting to hear that is going to continue over the next couple of years. And then also the challenge, I think, on attracting and retaining workforce. I know that's something that I've heard a lot about, and just as a challenge nobody has an answer for yet, but one that we're all working on together as a community.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a big issue. I've been hearing from a lot of different agencies about that. I heard a lot about it when I was at my previous role working with Secretary Buttigieg. So yeah, again, it's not unique to Virginia. I think, things that we've been seeing with a shortage of folks with CDL licenses, as well as if you have one, you could go deliver packages for Amazon. And, there's different things that are, I think, creating some pressures for those of us in the transit industry. So we would, really, we're hoping and we're thinking about doing, perhaps a roundtable or something later this year with transit CEOs. We'd love to partner with VTA and CTAV and others to really have some candid conversations about what are some of those challenges folks are facing on the operating and the capital cost escalation side. Part of that is workforce. And are there strategies maybe that are working in some places and we can do a better job at DRPT of supporting some of that peer learning? We can think about ways that we can be leveraging both our funding that we have, but also our ability to raise issues up, to elevate them, perhaps to work with our partners at the Department of Labor, others, to really think about these issues. So definitely top of mind.
And that kind of goes into the next question a little bit is, from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges facing public transit in Virginia today? And also, what do you think is the greatest opportunities that we have before us?
Great question. I'll double down a little bit on the escalating costs, because I do think it is a real challenge for us, both in terms of we're not unique to that. those who are working in healthcare, escalating costs, those who are working in education, escalating costs, people on an individual level are feeling escalating costs. And so it makes it hard for us to argue for more funding for our industry when we're not alone, because everyone's feeling the pain, right? And I think we see that playing out right now too, of like, there's a lot of needs. So I think, what can we do to really think about strategies that can help us to bend those cost curves, but also how do we tell the story in a really compelling and meaningful way for folks who we do need to continue to fund us, whether that's at the local level or the regional level, state or federal level, to really kind of understand these dynamics. We're seeing over the past 5 years that operating costs have increased 7% on average year over year. And this significantly outpaces growth in our revenues, which has only been about 1 to 3% each year. And we're also seeing, not surprisingly, that inflation and other economic factors have increased the cost of our capital assets and projects. And so we're kind of able to buy less with the money that we have, right? And we're projected a pretty significant funding shortfall to just meet all the needs for the planned projects. And certainly we just had the application period closed. We're in the process of reviewing those. Once again, we see demand far outstripping the resources that we have. And so really thinking about, what can we do about that challenge that maybe feels a little bit insurmountable, but I refuse to believe we can't figure this out, right? And it may not be the perfect solution. I'm not promising there's a silver bullet out there or anything like that. But I do think, are there ways that we can help to address that? It's been, I think, really heartening to hear about some of the work the state's already been doing around using the state procurement tool as a way to kind of use the purchasing power that we might have to be able to help buy buses that then hopefully make it a little bit easier and cheaper for folks to get at. It's been great to hear about some of the work folks on our team have been doing, even just to provide on-call, off-the-shelf, I'll call it technical assistance consulting services almost, right? Like, we can literally help you design that bus stop or design that bus shelter that hopefully, I love my friends in the consulting world. I was in the consulting world, but if you can have us at DRPT help to do that at no cost for you or low cost for you, we want to be able to do that. So are there other areas where we might be able to support that, again, through our funding tools, through our technical assistance tools, through education, is something I'm hopeful for. In terms of hope, I am really hopeful to see the ridership increases that are happening. I mean, I think it's a testament to the incredible work that's happening by agencies across the Commonwealth, but also my hat off to our elected officials at the local, regional, and state level. I think the state really has a serious commitment to investing in transportation. And even though we might be saying we need more resources, I don't think we should discount the funding that the state is putting into transportation, that our regional transportation commissions and authorities are putting into transportation, and that we see locally voters often coming back and saying, yep, we will be taxed a little bit more because we really see the value in that. So that gives me hope. Kind of tied, I don't know if it's a hope, but I'll put it out as a challenge for folks. I mentioned my dad. I've gotten to do a lot of work with AARP over my career, and I just continue to feel we are in no way as a country, and I'll say as a Commonwealth, really prepared for the aging population and what that's going to mean for mobility. I think it's too little funding at the state level that we currently have for paratransit. It's only about 1.5 million. We're hoping to bump that up to 2 million. We're looking for other ways at DRPT. We might be able to do some mid-cycle grants to support that. but we also, are seeing the 5310 program has been, we got a bump in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but it's been kind of a flat level, and the buying power of that, again, has decreased for us in Virginia. At the same time, 18% of the population right now is over the age 65. That percentage is just going to increase. 11% of our population are adults with disabilities. Again, that percentage is going to increase as people get older and get more disabilities. And it's costly to provide paratransit service, but it's critically important. And I'm hopeful that some of the micromobility work that's happening, some of the new technology tools that maybe can just help the interface. If you're a person who's relying on paratransit, in most instances, we require you to call up at least a day in advance to make a reservation, and you might be waiting on the phone for 45 minutes to talk to somebody who then might tell you that there's not a ride available for you. Like, that's just not good enough. And I don't think we in Virginia should settle for that being good enough. So that's my challenge to all of us in the transit world. Like it or not, hopefully the best case is we all get old, right? The alternative is not a good alternative. So if we're getting old, how do we ensure that transit's going to keep us mobile? It's going to get us to all the places we want to go and all the places we need to go. And I think that's going to require new partnerships, more funding, more creativity, and again, collaborations with folks beyond transit, people in healthcare, people in schools and education, businesses. There's just a lot of folks and a lot of partnerships that we can be seeing in that area.
Absolutely. And I think, in my time with VTA, one of the fastest growing areas of transit growth is in our rural communities, as they begin to kind of realize that transit is not just an urban, amenity. It really has tremendous benefits in our other communities for those who are aging in place. And then I would also, flip that coin over and say, 1 out of 4 Virginians between the ages of 16 and 35 don't have a driver's license. And so how do we, those kids who are growing up in our rural communities, how do they come back and start jobs and create economic development in the areas that, for the most part, need it the most? And so both for those who are aging, want to age in place comfortably in their homes, because we're all living longer. My grandmother just celebrated 100 years and is still very spry. But, for those who want to age in place, as well as those who, don't want to leave their communities to go get a job, but they also don't want to pay thousands of dollars a month for a car. It's a huge need across the Commonwealth. And I guess that kind of gets into my next question is, how do we plan for the strength and long-term stability and predictability of state funding? I know that's something that we've looked at, as you kind of alluded to, the costs are rising faster than state revenue. That is not an issue impacting us only. I know it's the same on the roadside and other spheres, but particularly in the face of the economic uncertainty. I was on a call with our friends at APTA, and there are tariffs, although I just saw they got overruled, of 10 or 20% on large capital expenditures for our transit buses, like a fee to be determined when you buy a bus or you buy, a part of your facility. And that just creates a lot of budget uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. It's a great question. It's a tough question, right? And I think, it comes down to key players fulfilling their roles. So we think about the General Assembly. They hold the power of the purse for us here in Virginia. And this session, there's been some level of understanding of the needs, but as I mentioned, there's a lot of competing issues and other needs. I think many of us were hopeful we might have seen a big funding bill this session. I think we're feeling a little less hopeful, or to put it mildly, right? But hey, I've worked on federal transportation for most of my career. And the truth is, like, you just got to keep going at it. You can't let the disappointments get you down. And anytime, if we're not successful, this General Assembly, or even if we are, you need to educate elected officials on what's the value proposition? Like, not just, oh, we need it because we need it, but what's the benefit? And I know there's been some incredible work I've seen by NVTC. We've been doing it DRPT, VTA, others of like the economic value that transit is providing to the state. I think it's like 600 million in, return investment in the state, the job creation that happens, that connectivity and mobility. You mentioned before, Danny, and we see it's true. People choosing places to live because they have good transit options and because they might have good urban fabric there too. So it's like they want the jobs, but they also want the quality of life. Transit is connected to both of those. Transit connects people to jobs, and we see sometimes employers forget that and maybe locate in places where it makes it really hard to serve with transit. And then they want us to like come and serve transit, which sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is like, that's going to be really costly and it's hard for the agency. Sometimes it's, can we have a partnership and maybe you'll provide some vans or something to do that first last mile connection. But I think it's really, we need to really work and focus on educating folks around the need, but around the opportunity. And one thing we're hoping to kick off later this year is, can we kind of do a refresh on our statewide transit plan to really have it be a transformational plan of, what would it look like if we had, great, we expanded VRE, we have like connections that are happening, we're increasing our paratransit, we're thinking about micromobility studies, like what could that really look like and mean for us in a way that could get people really excited? We saw, I think, SJ28 in Northern Virginia, they've kind of come up with a pretty compelling plan. Much is happening out in the southwestern part of the state. What does that look like? Charlottesville, like all parts of the state, there's like great things that are happening, and maybe even more can happen with that. So I think that's part of it. We at DRPT want to be your strong partners in making the case. We do a lot of great data work. We've got our data portal. How can we help lift this up? I think hearing those personal stories always matters to people to hear that. And so, we need to be partners with folks who are working in the transit agencies, hearing from you, hearing from what are your needs, helping to define the exact funding needs that we have, and keeping a transportation a priority on people's minds and hearts. So I'm not going to say, oh, we're going to get it this year, but we just got to keep working at it. And you are right, Danny, that not only is that a state conversation, the federal government is also in the process of thinking about what the future of federal funding is going to look like as well. So.
Absolutely. And I apologize. If Grant or Andy are on, please don't kill me. I haven't thought this through. So I'm going to ask a question, or it's an idea, so my apologies also, Director. This is me going off the rails. Figuring out how we do an economic impact for transit. What is the cost of a person in 2019 and 2020 for a driver, a cost of a bus, and doing a trend line across the transit industry? What does it cost to put a bus stop in, so that we as an industry, VTA and DRPT and CTAB and our transit partners can track that. So when we have these conversations, we can go to legislators and say, look, we've been collecting data and the cost to buy a bus has gone up 60% or 70%. Yeah. The cost of a driver has gone up 45 or 60%. Healthcare at Greater Lynchburg Transit, their healthcare costs have gone up 43% in 2 years. They're now spending 25% more on healthcare for their employees than they are fuel for the buses, which just is mind blowing when you really think about it. And how do we track and quantify those costs over multiple years? And I think, and so sorry, that's not a question. That's just kind of an idea that popped into my head as you were talking about ways of helping tell the story, because I think other industries do that really well. I know APTA does it a little bit on the federal level of maybe figuring out how we do it as Virginia Transit keeps growing exponentially. Of how we show the impact of things outside our control sometimes.
I love that idea. So I hope Grant and Andy don't get mad at me too. But no, I think it's a great idea. And I think it is also helpful because, you know, that there's a lot of myths and misperceptions about transit out there, let's be honest, right? I think sometimes there's this sentiment of well, you have all these empty buses and you must not really know how to deliver service. Why can't you guys be more efficient? Why is it costing so much? And I'm often like, well, have you ever been on a bus? Because, yeah, maybe you saw an empty bus, but there's very full buses that are running around. And you also don't know for like the people who are on that bus, the value that that's bringing. And again, it is a public service, but I digress. But I do think this point of like, some of our basic business fundamentals have really increased in cost. And it's not a statement of being a poor manager of your fiscal responsibilities. It's the reality of things are costing more, and we're trying to figure out how to really meet that. Most transit GMs that I've gotten to know over the years, most of them are like, I want to do more. I want to do better. I want to figure out how to innovate. I want to be able to serve more people in my community. And we have a lot of constraints. So I think that's a great idea, Danny. I also want to, again, just like give a shout out for some of our funding programs that can help, our merit special programs that really can help you like innovate and think about new things. The TRIP program you mentioned, Danny, I mean, there are ways to use that. Some we can get a little creative on the capital side. Some we can support some of the operating side to try new things that might help to reduce some of those pressure points as well, and also make transit more affordable for people. But I love the idea of like let's but we need to do that with all of you, right? Like we need to get you to, I think we have some of that from the information you provide to us, but yeah, we'll do it on our shared to-do list.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that. And there's a bill before the General Assembly that expands TRIP a little bit more to make it more innovative. So to everybody watching and listening, please be aware of that and look out for that. I think that may really open up some unique opportunities next year as that continues to move through the legislative process, and it passed the House unanimously. So we're very excited about that, and hopefully that will continue to progress through the state Senate. And kind of building off of those points, Director Zimmerman, how does DRPT ensure that people across the Commonwealth have that equitable access to transit and resources and support from the agency and just overall?
No, well, certainly it is something I think has always been on DRPT's mind. We are a state agency, and I think, as you heard earlier, a lot of my heart is in rural parts of the state, and certainly my rural home state. But I think, we are looking at ways both with the merit funding itself. That is a program. Clearly, we fund rural capital projects. We fund rural operating and providing those funds to be able to support that. Some of our funding can be used as match for some of the federal rural funds and that 5310 funds as well. And so I think, we are really hoping to add our voice to others who at the federal level want to make sure that funding for rural transit remains strong, hopefully gets even stronger for rural transit, because I think we see the important need that it plays in communities. As you noted, we're seeing a lot of ridership growth in those places. And in many of those communities as well, you might have the transit agency, but you do also have other non-profit partners or healthcare partners who are part of that transit ecosystem. So, certainly our resources, I think, are important part of that mix. I think it's on Monday. We will be releasing our new coordinated human services mobility plan. We'll be sharing that out with folks. That will also kind of provide a framework for what are some of the investments that we could be making and some of the ways we can be coordinating with folks in the human services arena arena, our healthcare partners and others around that. So, shout out for that. Look for that. It's got some great maps. Certain parts of the state, particularly the Southwest state, part of the state is where we see higher percentages of rural population, also higher percentages of folks who are living in poverty. And so again, transit really a critical life blood service there for folks. And then, of course, a lot of our funding goes to some of our larger metro areas because that's where we have a lot of transit riders as well in the state. And so, again, through the state funding that we're giving, and we want to continue to be closely involved in the discussions about funding support for WMATA. WMATA plays a critical role in the DC metro area. Again, very frequent rider of Metro over the last 30 years. So critical, not just to make Metro work, but how it connects the region, how vital it is to the economy. There are some serious funding challenges that the SJ28 report outlined, and I know NVTC and NVTA and others are closely tracking that. But we have a lot of other providers, transit providers up in Northern Virginia, here in the Rappahannock, Fredericksburg area. We have them in Hampton Roads and other parts of our state. And so we have opportunities to be funding and supporting that. I don't think ever intend to just, have one favored child amongst the many in Virginia. So we at DRPT, we care about all of our parts of the state and all of our partners throughout the Commonwealth.
And kind of building off of that a little bit, I think, and we talked about it previously, the kind of innovation, where do you see the greatest opportunity for innovation? I know we talk a lot about zero emission vehicles, microtransit, and data tools. And one of the ones that one of my goals is to figure out how to get from Arlington to Bristol without ever needing a car. And that it's one of my life things to figure out how to do. And I know Amtrak will be in there and Breeze will be in there and the local transits, but where do you see innovation on kind of doing that? Because you mentioned the community partners sometimes around our transit agency. How can we make sure that Virginians who may want to take their Bedford bus, the Otter bus in Bedford, then connect to their local, nonprofit that gets them maybe the last mile into the county from the town? Kind of where do you see the RPT's role in helping push some of those innovative solutions and pilots and scales in that regard?
No, I feel like you answered that a little bit in your question, Danny, but I'll double down on it, right? So I want to give a shout out for our merit demonstration and technical assistance programs that we have, and especially the demonstration program. I hope I have this right. I feel like we were maybe a little undersubscribed in that program this year. Staff, I'm sorry if I got that wrong. But even that's not true, encourage folks to take a look at that, because that program, and then also our technical assistance grants, those programs really have been funding that we've seen a number of transit agencies around the state use to do very innovative work in their communities. And then we can take that and we can share that. So my hope for this year, I'll talk a little bit more about those programs, but my hope is that we could actually pull together through future lunch and learns or other peer exchanges, some of the grantees that we've been funding, some of the work that's been happening, the lessons learned from that, what advice would they have for other transit agencies and communities who might be thinking of doing something similar. So I think about the Dash in Alexandria, that they have this vision blind spot camera pilot that was funded through, let me make sure I get this right. That was funded through merit demonstration, and it allows them to kind of put these two exterior cameras on the front of the bus and two screens inside these front pillars to really be able to see where there might be some blind spots to help improve safety, which is a critically important goal, right? So safety both while the bus is in operation and avoiding collisions with pedestrians or with other vehicles. What a great technology. Let's learn from that, and let's talk to our partners in some other state agencies who are maybe what is this new technology and how do you want us to improve that? How does that work on our city streets? That's one example. example, we have a number of places like Bay Transit who've been doing these microtransit studies. And so what are we learning through those microtransit studies? We'd love at DRPT to be funding more of those to see, each place, it's kind of playing out a little bit differently, but collectively, I think we're learning. And I think there's some great things we can find out of, what works for a place like Bay Transit and their utilization of microtransit and how that might be similar or different to how it's being used in another part of the state. Similarly with TRIP, we've been funding some innovative work in the reduced fare and the fare free programs, which I think, again, what are we learning from that? How is that changing the way people are maybe thinking about transit in those communities? And then on the tech side, DRPT has funded access to Remix's planning software. I just want to make sure folks know that's there. It's for you to use. We've purchased it, so it's no cost for you, and you can use that for fixed route and on-demand service planning. So that's available to everybody. And I think with that, we're seeing some of the places that have utilized that. Again, you can come to us if you need some additional funding through our special demonstration program or through TRIP or others to like put that to good use to get more efficient and effective transit planning routes, and then seeing that to help grow ridership as well. So I think, those are just some ways that I'm excited about. It's really a time for innovation. And I think, you can let change happen to you, or you can embrace the change and be the change. And so for transit agencies, how do we think about some of the new software apps, both for our use within the building, but also outside of the building for our customers? I've been really excited by some of the work some transit agencies are doing to improve their interface to make it easier for people to get real-time information on when the next bus is coming. Again, I mentioned paratransit, like how could we use it to actually make it as easy to get paratransit as it is to call an Uber or Lyft? Like that's probably a pie in the sky dream, but you're going to Bristol. That's my dream on that one. So maybe we'll meet you there. So that'll be good.
And I think this kind of leads into your comments. Having been doing, I think I celebrate 20 years in the industry next January. And I've seen the evolution of DRPT as kind of a funder into doing so much more. And it's been incredibly exciting. I think Alan Saunders on the entire engineering team at DRPT is, kind of some of the unsung heroes of the work that they're doing and expanding the impact of DRPT by having engineers on staff who can help with facilities and help with bus stops and educate transit agencies. Some of our members, and some of your grantees, if somebody calls out sick, the CEO is driving a bus that day. And so they don't have that expertise to do a bus stop. They want to, and their citizens and their passengers want it. They just don't have the expertise. And it's so exciting to see DRPT kind of fill that role in so many different respects. And so, kind of where do you see that ideal partnership between DRPT and the local transit agencies? And how will that evolve with communication and collaboration under your leadership over the next coming years?
Yeah. So we've touched on some of that, but I'll just kind of put a pin in a few points there. I think, first and foremost, our work is a two-way street. And so we judge success for DRPT by how well all of you are doing. And so transit agencies, you were there literally on the streets doing the work. We are here supporting you in all possible ways that we can support you, is my hope, right? We're a funder, we can be a convener, and I've talked about our desire to find ways that we can bring people together, that we can learn from you, that you can be learning from each other, and that can help to inform future policy efforts that hopefully we have collectively to increase funding and to drive innovation, to grow ridership, to grow public support for not just funding transit, but for using transit. Like it makes me happy to see more people using transit, more kids using it, more, older adults using it, people with disabilities who find the freedom of being able to live fully independent lives. Like, yay, that puts a smile on my face. Commuters who are like, I don't have to get in my car and feel that. Like, that's success, right? So it's a two-way street. We want to, and I said we hope to be able to do some roundtables this year on this. I know the comms team is looking at ways that we can tell the story, support you with some of the marketing efforts, do some of these lunch and learns. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention we're going to be opening a new 5th route for the Breeze service that I'm super excited. It's going to be, connecting. It's our first east-west route. You'll be able to get, basically from Charlottesville to the beach down there in Virginia Beach, more or less. So like, that's pretty exciting to be able to connect Hampton Roads with Central Virginia. And so we're really excited about that. And so that's a partnership though, right? Like, this all comes from our hearing from communities of where those needs are. And so the partnership for DRPT isn't just with transit agencies, and I won't forget our rail side as well. We have many rail partners, but it's also with those local governments. It's with the transit riders. It's with employers to understand, how important transit is for the economic vitality and health of the Commonwealth, and for getting, their customers, their workers there. And I think also partnership, I mentioned before, like, I'd love to build the partnership with some of our housing and developer friends. Again, transit only works as well as kind of the land use around it. So when we have land use that makes it really hard and really expensive to run transit, it doesn't really meet any of our goals. So I certainly recognize, there's a lot of variation across the state. I'm not saying, every place needs to be Arlington where I lived and loved the lifestyle, but I think, how do we look for opportunities around some of our VRE stations, around some of our transit stations? I know there's a number of places looking to build out bus rapid transit. Can we have better, land use to support that? And so I'm excited of what partnerships can we have with housing and developer folks that maybe we haven't had before, that also can help us grow ridership and grow support for transit. So I want DRPT to help play that convening role, to bring us together and find new ways that we can build new alliances and new advocates for transit.
And you mentioned the Virginia Breeze, which I know has been tremendously successful, but I think that's a great example of kind of the 10,000-foot view that DRPT is able to offer in connecting the local transit agencies to a statewide intercity bus network. Because, if you're trying to allow folks to age in place or attract younger workforce, having that connection outside the community so they can go visit grandchildren across the state, you may have a local transit, but if they're confined to their community by themselves and don't have the ability to travel to a far, wider network, sometimes that they're just as restrained as if they, were restrained to or confined to their house. And the Virginia Breeze does fill a huge void in that regard. And so that's been very exciting to see over the years. And I'm glad that the East-West service is coming along and looking forward to that ribbon cutting. And I know that will be tremendously successful. I personally hate driving on 64. So I'm looking forward to taking that as well. Something near and dear to my heart, in addition to all your professional accomplishments that I mentioned a little bit earlier, you've been a public transportation advocate. In my 2 decades doing this, that's the first time I think we've had a DRPT director who has kind of a little bit of an advocacy background. So what experiences from your career shape how you lead and how transit providers can expect from you as a collaborator?
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Because I will say, hopefully anyone in this business is an advocate for transit. Maybe not the same way we mean it, of like being a rebel rouser, at some nonprofit, but hopefully we're all transit advocates on this call. I think, again, like, I guess it informs me in a couple of ways. One, I do firmly believe, having sat in a lot of different seats over my 30-year career, in the public sector, in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector, at different levels of government. It's like we all have a piece. We all have a piece of the puzzle. And you can't put the full puzzle together if you don't have all the pieces. And so we need them all. I think being an advocate, for me, is really kind of informed both by my own experience of relying and using transit. So I do really encourage anyone who's in this industry, please use the service. Like, I'm always a little saddened by how many people in our industry have never actually, maybe they've taken the bus, but they don't, like, it's maybe, there's a new line and you're on it or something. Like really try to spend a little time sometime to get where you want to on the bus. Yeah. And if you don't, if you're like, well, I can't do it because of X, Y, and Z, like, so what are we going to do about X, Y, and Z? Because you're probably not the only person not taking the bus because of X, Y, and Z. And so some of that we can control, but a lot of it is totally outside of our purview, right? Like land use issues, transit agencies don't, have a say over that. But you can build a partnership. You can talk to people who do have control over that to say, hey, your land use decisions actually are making it really hard for me to do it. So I think my experience as an advocate is kind of informed by both what I've seen in that, and then really by working with a lot of folks on the outside who've been trying to understand the inside game. That's kind of been some of the work I've done. And you hear their stories and you understand how important this work is. And hopefully, again, everybody knows that. Like, it's easy to it's your job, and some days it's hard to feel excited about one's job. But the work that we do, providing affordable, reliable, safe mobility for people, it's like God's work. I'm sorry, like, it's so important. It's so fundamental to the communities. And so again, like, don't be afraid of the advocates. They can be terrifying in some public meetings, but they are coming from a place of wanting and demanding better transit in their communities. And so I just bring that with me, that I'm always thinking about, like, okay, how can we kind of think about ways we can be doing things better? I'm fully aware, sometimes advocates want things, and there's a lot of very realistic reasons why we can't do that. So I'm not like trying to be a Pollyanna in that in any way. But I think we can educate each other on that, right? Like, people who are advocates, I often find, if someone's really mad at you, like, it can be hard, but still listen to them, because there's some truth in that, right? And so what do we learn from it? How does it inform our work? If you can turn someone who is really not happy with what you were doing into someone who's going to be an advocate for you, they will be your strongest advocate, because they've kind of made that flip. So I don't know if that answers it well, Danny, but I do think, to me, it has a big impact. And I think it is something I'm always kind of carrying with me, of thinking about different people I've known over my careers, and, what do I've learned from, what would I think about with that? And then how do we reconcile that with the complexities and the constraints and the challenges of working, especially in the public sector, against maybe that idealism that sometimes our advocacy friends have.
Yeah, and the reality sometimes of the budgets, and the constraints of all the different things that we learn. I appreciate that. Thank you, Director Zimmerman. And I know we're getting close on time, and I have a couple more questions, but we did have a community question that I wanted to ask. And Ashley asked, your point about freedom and access for young people and people with disabilities was very powerful. As transportation planners, how can we center the voices of these groups to help shift the perspectives on driving as a universal default and progress multimodal projects?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley, for that question. I think hopefully the work we do really can be community driven. Like if we have a project and the community is not behind it, that's not going to help us. And I think what comes to mind in responding to your question is, are we developing and designing our planning processes to include a multitude of voices? And I think, there's been some great work that the American Planning Association and others have done to really think about community engagement, where meetings are happening, how they're being designed. I think a lot of times I have seen in my career, just not enough of a budget gets devoted for community engagement. And so when we can design with people who fully represent the community, which includes people with disabilities, which includes children, which includes people who don't maybe speak English as their first language, with the full scope, right? We start to get a sense for designing things, whether it's designing that bus shelter or designing the route or whatever it might be, that can more fully represent the fullness of needs that service might have. So for me, it kind of starts and ends with who's at the table to help inform and help to shape these projects, so they really can be multimodal, and they can also have universal design elements included in them.
Absolutely. And one of the things I've experienced was attending a community meeting about transit in a location that had no transit access. And it's like, how are the people who want this type of service or need this type of service supposed to get to a community meeting in the middle of the day that has no accessibility outside of a car driving? And just making sure, that the voices that do need to be in the room have an opportunity to be in that room as well. So as we kind of wrap up, one of my final questions, one of the books that kind of impacted my thinking a lot about the work that we're doing, and I think we're all blessed in the transit community to kind of wake up and know that we have an impact every day on people's lives, was a book called $20 a Gallon, which kind of theorized what life would be like as gas prices continue to climb. And I reread it every couple of years. And while it's, projections haven't come to fruit yet, I think some of the infrastructure that we need to do has helped guide my own personal views. Is there a book or books that have kind of impacted you in that regard? And do you mind sharing them with the audience that have helped shape your worldview?
Yeah, what a great question. What a fun one. It's hard. It was hard. I knew you were going to ask this, and it was hard for me to land on one in the past that had shaped me. But I will use this to make a pitch for a book that a colleague of mine that I have great respect for, Charles T. Brown, in the last year, a book of his, Arrested Mobility, was published. It's called Arrested Mobility, Overcoming the Threat to Black Movement. And I will say, having worked with Charles and with a number of other folks over the last 10 years to really try to address really deep mobility disparities in our communities of color, it was very striking for me. Even just conversations about, a safe walking environment, very different for me and how I express that and feel that, versus some people who are in communities where walking is not safe. And it's not only because of the lack of a sidewalk. There are other things that make walking unsafe. So I recommend his book, Arrested Mobility. I got to work with Charles quite a bit on the Reconnecting Communities program when I was at USDOT. And I think it's a great read, and would suggest that one.
Excellent. Thank you. And I put that on my list. I'm always looking for good books. So I'll give that a read and encourage everybody else. And then the final question, we all love a good song about transportation. So what is your favorite?
Okay. You got it. Well, I do love me disco. So I'm going to go hands down Love Train, which I was telling my staff, Love Train was a walk-on song I had many years ago when unbeknownst to me, had to give a keynote at the International Transportation Workers Union Conference in Las Vegas. And I was like totally terrified because I didn't know I was going to have to do that. And I walked onto Love Train and it instantly made me feel all better. So, that's transit, right? It gives you access to opportunity. You never know what you're going to do with it, but you got the Love Train behind you and it's all going well. So boogie on down to Love Train the rest of the day, Danny.
I certainly will as head into boogie on into the weekend. Thank you again, Director Zimmerman, for joining us today, and thank you to the entire audience for joining us. And I hope everybody has a fantastic weekend, and we see you at VTA's conference. And please have a wonderful and hopefully dry the rest of the day. Thank you again, Director, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Great. Thank you, Danny. Thanks, everyone. Bye.